bounce like a loop machine. Going around town, people trying to get down.
Hello and welcome to another edition of the BCSN SportsWrap as we wrap up week number 5 of the HBCU football season. Brian Fulford here, going with a quick recap of some of the action from this past weekend. And then, of course, our man A.D. Drew was on location at, count 'em, 3 games. The BCSN tour of the DMV as A.D. moved from Howard University in Washington, D.C., on down to Bowie State in Maryland, and then finished up at Morgan State University in Baltimore, Maryland. So A.D. will give his report on all 3 games. Of course, only one of those games was one of our feature games from the past weekend. But before I get to that game, let's start with what was probably the biggest game, maybe the biggest upset of the weekend, and that was the Kentucky State Thoroughbreds with a 33-25 victory over Jackson State in the Circle City Classic in Indianapolis, Indiana. Kentucky State now is 2-1 on the year with 2 wins over Division I schools and only 1 loss in conference to Tuskegee a couple of weeks ago. Jackson State, with the loss, drops down to 1-3. And Jackson State actually opened this ball game in the first quarter with a 10-0 lead on an 11-play drive that led to a score, then picked up a fumble from Kentucky State, and then went on a 12-play drive. So Jackson State jumped out to a 10-0 lead, but Kentucky State would go with 33 unanswered points between the from the end of the first quarter all the way through the end of the third quarter on 5 touchdowns. Jackson State scored a couple of late fourth quarter touchdowns to cut the deficit to 33-25, but Kentucky State, look, they are for real. And Coach Charlie Jackson has these guys. Now we just need to see these guys play in conference, and we need to see, can they do it in conference, because right now they are definitely a team on the rise and definitely worth paying attention to. This is the first time in school history that Kentucky State has recorded multiple wins versus Division I teams. If you look at the total stats, Kentucky State had 353 yards rushing on 48 attempts. That's an average of 7.4 yards per carry, 8 different ball carriers. Kentucky State had no need for passing, although the one pass they completed, they threw 3 passes in the game, but the one pass they did complete, it was a 31-yard touchdown. So how's that for you? But the Kentucky State defense, we talked about their defensive performance. I tried to tell Bobby Swoop on the preview show last week, Kentucky State's defense had 10 tackles for loss in that ball game. So all credit to Kentucky State. If there was a key play of that ball game, it had to be Jacob Abrams, his fumble recovery and a return for a touchdown with 9:20 to play in the third quarter. That came 2 plays after Kentucky State had opened the second half with a touchdown. And so all of a sudden, a halftime score that was 22-10 went to 33-10, and pretty much that was all she was going to write. So, again, Kentucky State with a nice win. Jackson State, an up-and-down season so far again, but Jackson State's about to move into conference play, and we'll see if they can right the ship. Moving over to Washington, D.C., the nation's capital, home of Howard University, taking on Bethune-Cookman in the MEAC opener for both teams. Well, actually, take that back. Howard did already have one conference game under their belt against Delaware State, and you'll hear more about this from A.D. A little bit later on. But obviously the big story coming into this ball game was the announcement on Friday from Kalen Newton, the quarterback, the returning MEAC Player of the Year, Offensive Player of the Year, the preseason Player of the Year. He announced that he was not playing anymore this season to preserve his red shirt. Of course, if those who aren't familiar, the new NCAA rules, which I think went into effect maybe a year or two ago, allow for players to play 4 games before they can redshirt. So Newton, obviously, Howard was 1-3 coming into this game against Bethune-Cookman, and just with the way the season had gone, there's many that believe that he will actually enter the transfer portal and look to go elsewhere. Now, he did not say that, but that is sort of the belief running around in many circles. It should be noted that Kalen Newton is scheduled to graduate Howard in May. So assuming he takes the red shirt, he will actually have 2 years of eligibility left, and let the speculation begin on where Kalen Newton may end up. Will he end up at another HBCU? Will he actually follow maybe his former coach, Mike London, down at William & Mary? Remains to be seen. But as this game took place, Bethune-Cookman lost to Howard last year. That would not be so this year. Bethune-Cookman would get the 37-29 win, improve to 3-1, 1-0 in conference. Howard drops now to 1-4 on the season. Bethune opened up with a 21-7 first quarter lead, even had a 24-7 lead at halftime before AD had to rush out of there and head down the Bowie. So in terms of Bethune, Akevius Williams, their quarterback, had 3 rushing touchdowns, and you know, he would have had a 4th actually on an 80-yard touchdown run, but it was called back due to penalty. Williams he was 16 of 23 passing for 199 yards, had 16 rushing attempts for 101 yards, so a complete day. Akevius Williams. Bethune had gone 3 previous games without scoring in the first quarter, so the Wildcats definitely made it a habit, or made it a point of emphasis to get off to a good first quarter start. And the defense, Bethune's defense, took advantage of the new quarterback for Howard, as they had 5 sacks and 1 interception in the game. And speaking of that new quarterback for Howard, it was freshman quarterback Quentin Williams, 6'4", 178-pound freshman from Upper Marlboro, Maryland. And he had a pretty solid debut, if I must say. He was 21 of 35, 179 passing yards, 3 touchdowns, had 1 interception, threw his longest pass completion was 35 yards, rushed for 25 net yards, and a score. So a pretty interesting debut. Obviously, he will get more experience as the year, and I can imagine for the young man, he took great advantage of the opportunity. And so it'll be interesting to see how the season goes for Howard from here. Should be noted also for Bethune, Jimmy Robinson, the wide receiver / special teams kick returner, All-American, had 202 all-purpose yards, 147 on return, and he probably would have had a touchdown had he not got tripped up. I believe at maybe the 1 or 2 yard line is where he got tripped up. So that is the final again. Bethune-Cookman 37, Howard 29. Moving over to a CIAA matchup, Winston-Salem State taking on Virginia Union, and this one would go down to the wire. And, you know, it seems like there's a theme right now in the CIAA, and it has to do with block punts. And if you have a lead in the fourth quarter and you're punting, you might want to have max protection on, because it would be a blocked punt. A blocked punt by Virginia Union would actually give them a second opportunity after a missed field goal that would have originally given them a lead. So let me backtrack for a second here. Going into the fourth quarter there, Virginia Union's kicker, Jefferson Souza, missed a 29-yard field goal with 3 minutes to play in the fourth quarter. Virginia Union trailing by 2 to Winston-Salem. The Rams were unable to move the ball anywhere, and so they were forced to punt on that possession. And then what do you know? There's that block punt. And it's funny, Dominique Graves, who is the quarterback for Winston-Salem State, he actually is the punter, and he had his punt blocked by Virginia Union backup quarterback Erwin Faison, who's actually on the special teams. So, and that would eventually give Souza an opportunity to kick a 25-yard field goal a few plays later, and Virginia Union would go on to win this game with 21 seconds to play. That's when he kicked that field goal. Virginia Union would improve to 3-1 and 1-0 in conference. And I can't get this right, Winston-Salem State, say that 5 times, the Rams fall to 1-3, 0-1, and those 3 losses are by, if I'm not mistaken, the first 2 weeks they lost by 6 points each, and now by 1. So the Rams have, let's say a possession away, a touchdown away from being 4-0, and so that's got to be pretty tough, and it's got to be tough for the interim coach Robert Massey for the Rams, who actually serves and doubles as the special teams coach, to see something like that happen. For Virginia Union, give some credit to Tobias Taylor. Tobias Taylor had to do a little double duty as he served on the kickoff return team, actually returned a kickoff 59 yards that actually set up a touchdown for Virginia Union, and then later on it led to the Souza field goal that cut the deficit to 15-13. So the Rams had outgained Virginia Union 334 to 270 yards in the game. They were 2 of 2 on fourth down conversions, and all in all, this was a well-attended crowd, 7,300 people at Hovey Field in Richmond, Virginia, to see this contest, and a great CIAA matchup there between 2 teams. I'm sure Virginia Union will be well and highly ranked and regarded when our new BCSN top 5 polls officially come out in the month of October. Moving on to the SIAC and a matchup in the AU Center, Savannah State traveling up to Morehouse College. Savannah State, winners of their last 2 ball games. Morehouse coming off of a loss the previous week, and Savannah State would actually win this contest and improve to 3-1. Savannah State would win 17-10, as Savannah State would improve to 3-1, 2-0 in the conference, and that is the 3rd consecutive win for Savannah State, 2nd consecutive win in the SIAC, of course, since their return nearly 20 years ago. For Morehouse, now they dropped to 1-3 overall, 0-1. It just happened that was the 30th meeting between the 2 schools, and with the win, Savannah State tied the series up at 15-15. To recap a little bit of the scoring, Morehouse jumped out to a 10-0 lead in the first quarter behind Morehouse jumped out to a 10-0 lead in the first quarter, and then Savannah State's Quintavious Wilson scored for 55 yards to cut the deficit to 10-7. Then moving into the second quarter, Savannah State basically owned that quarter, outscoring Morehouse 10-0. And 2 plays after that rushing touchdown, it would be an interception, a pick 6 by Adorian Beach, an interception of Morehouse's Jalen Brown that was returned 25 yards. That gave Savannah State the 14-10 lead. But pretty much this was a defensive battle back and forth by both teams. There were a total of 17 punts in this ball game, 10 of them by Savannah State's Giovanni Lugo and 7 by Morehouse's Esdella Fernando. So both kickers definitely getting some work out in this ball game. There were no more than 10 first downs by either team. Savannah State had 8 first downs, Morehouse had 10, and there were, Savannah State had 191 total offensive yards, 158 of them were rushing. Morehouse had 302, and Morehouse only had 1 rushing first down and 82 net yards. So pretty much a strong defensive performance by Savannah State, and we can see now that Savannah State, with a record of 3-1, is slowly moving up the polls and taking up some strong consideration. It'll be interesting to see how far Savannah State can go, especially as they play more teams in conference. And Morehouse, where's the season gone for Morehouse? to 1-3 now, and needing some wins. They just need some wins right now as they've lost the last 2 in a row. Moving over to Dallas, Texas for the State Fair Classic, Prairie View A&M versus Grambling, and this one would be handed over to a young man from the Dallas area, DeWanya Tucker, as he would have a record-breaking performance as Prairie View A&M would win for the second consecutive year. You don't get a chance to say that too often in this rivalry. And Prairie View won 42-36, and now the Panthers are 2-3 on the year, 2-1 in conference. Grambling still winless on the year. They're 0-4 overall, 0-2 against the SWAC opponents. Grambling actually opened up this ball game and had a 17-7 lead in the first quarter before Prairie View went on a 24-6 run to close the half, only giving up a pick six by Jalen Morton that gave Grambling their points during the midst of that run. Prairie View would put up 607 total offensive yards in the ball game, and I mentioned that record-breaking performance by DeWanya Tucker. He had 263 net yards on 28 carries, had 26 carries, and 2 touchdowns. And his teammate, Jalen Morton, the quarterback, had 128 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns as well. He also passed for 192 yards and a touchdown, and, of course, he threw a pick six. So he technically had 2 touchdowns, one for his team, one for the other guy. Grambling, in terms of scoring, they actually had an interception return for a touchdown. They had a punt return touchdown, but offensively, not much happening for Grambling in this ball game. I mean, at one point, Prairie View had a 42-23 lead in the fourth quarter before Grambling scored a couple of late touchdowns, and it might have had people thinking for a moment, we don't want to give up another game like they did last week. But Prairie View would actually win this ball game, hold on, and snap a 3-game losing streak. And so the race in the SWAC gets a lot cloudier, and it sets up a great contest in a couple of weeks between Southern and Prairie View. I mean, what a game that's going to be in 2 weeks. And so I've already seen some video and a little talking going on, so it'll be interesting to see how that game goes. We'll get to Southern in just a moment. But now I want to move over to the MEAC, and, the Florida A&M Rattlers, off a big win against Southern, you could say they sort of had a little hangover. And they didn't have their greatest performance, but they did just enough to get a win on the road at Norfolk State, winning 30-28 over the Spartans. FAMU improves to 3-1, 1-0 in the conference. Norfolk State would drop to 1-4, 0-1. And this was one of those ball games where both teams early on in the first quarter, traded scores in the opening moments of the game. Norfolk State would score first. FAMU came back to tie it. Norfolk State would retake the lead. FAMU would come back to tie it again. And that's sort of how this game went until FAMU kind of got out to a lead. But even being up 30-21 wasn't safe because a late score by Norfolk State cut the deficit down to 2. Statistically, you could say this was a very even ball game. First downs, 23-21 in favor of FAMU. Total offensive snaps, 72-71 in favor of Norfolk State. Rushing attempts, passing completions, also very much even. The total yards in this ball game, how about this? FAMU, 437 total yards. Norfolk State, 401. So, as I said, a very even contest, and it just comes down to 1 or 2 plays that made all the difference in the world. And in terms of quarterbacks, these probably had to be, now that Kalen Newton has decided to not play anymore this year, and with all respect to Akevius Williams of Bethune and Khalil Carter of A&T, Ryan Stanley and Jawan Carter statistically might be the two best quarterbacks in the MEAC for the rest of this season, and both had pretty good days. Ryan Stanley was 27 of 37 for 293 yards and a touchdown, and Jawan Carter was 28 of 42 for 308 yards with one touchdown and one interception. FAMU invites North Carolina Central into Tallahassee this upcoming weekend for homecoming, and Norfolk State don't have their schedule right in front of me, but Norfolk State obviously will have conference games and look to try to get on to their winning ways as best as possible here and right the ship. Norfolk State, a good ball club, just coming up short in a few games this year. Now our versus game of the weekend was this Southern UAPB, Arkansas Pine Bluff hosting Southern. Of course, Arkansas Pine Bluff has been all the rage coming off of 3 consecutive wins, going into this ball game 3-1 off of a win against Tennessee State on the last play of the game. And then there's Southern coming into the ball game with a 1-3 record after a loss to FAMU. The Versus Sports Simulator actually thought Southern would win this game 39-34, and I think even myself and AD, we both kind of believe Arkansas Pine Bluff, if I'm not mistaken. I'm speaking for AD here. I'm thinking Arkansas Pine Bluff might win this game. But, of course, Bobby Swoop told us, he said, watch out for Southern's defense. And he said Southern's defense would be the key to this ball game, and doggone it, Bobby was 100% spot on correct, as Southern's defense and their ground game were the keys to this game as they put a beating on UAPB 31-7. And Southern would improve now to 2-3, 1-0 in the conference, and UAPB is now 3-2 with a 1-1 record in the conference. Southern actually jumped out to a 14-0 lead with 2 touchdowns in about a 3-minute window late in the first quarter. One of those came thanks to an interception by their defense after the first score of the ball game, and that set up the second touchdown with 40 seconds remaining. Consecutive interceptions by both teams actually helped UAPB get their only score of the game. There happened to be 4 interceptions in the second quarter, 2 of them by Arkansas Pine Bluff's Shannon Patrick, and 2 of them by Ladarius Skelton of Southern. In all, UAPB threw 4 interceptions in the game. Of course, Patrick threw 3 of them. Skylar Perry, the other quarterback in UAPB's 2-quarterback system, threw an interception. And it was Southern's defense, though. Southern's defense limited Arkansas Pine Bluff with 2 good running backs. At least that's what I kept telling Bobby. They held them to 61 net yards rushing, while they themselves rushed for 269 yards. And a lot of that belongs credit to Ladarius Skelton. The quarterback had 3 rushing touchdowns. Christopher Chaney had 12 attempts for 107 yards, and Devon Ben had 26 attempts for 94 yards. So Southern just got back to playing some good, solid defense, and then just decided we're going to run the ball and keep the ball out of this Arkansas Pine Bluff offense. And so, look, the first test for Arkansas Pine Bluff didn't quite go as expected. So where do they go from here? It'll be interesting to see, can the Golden Lions maintain and can they get back to their winning the winning ways of this year? Obviously, 3 wins in this year has already surpassed the most wins that they've had in the last few seasons. So now it's important for them to get a few more wins and keep this train moving. And for Southern, a nice win for Southern. I mean, they needed this win heading into the bye, and now they get ready for a big matchup against Prairie View A&M coming up. Just a few more games that I wanted to spotlight that caught my attention here, that wanted to bring up in this podcast before I turn it over to AD, and that's Alabama A&M with a 62-20 win over Central State. in Mobile, Alabama, in the Gulf Coast Challenge, and it would be Akil Glass. Listen to these numbers, probably the most efficient passing day by any quarterback. He was 22 of 26, 339 yards, 4 touchdowns, 0 interceptions. Jordan Bentley, running back for Alabama A&M, actually had 3 rushing touchdowns as well, and Bentley had 103 net yards. And then Zabrian Moore, wide receiver, with right now, by my estimation, I believe he had the most yards of any receiver in HBCU. He had 8 receptions for 218 yards, scored twice, and so now Alabama A&M moves to 3-2 on the season. Down in Murfreesboro, or actually in, I believe, Murfreesboro, North Carolina, it would be the Shawan Hawks playing McKendree in a non-conference game. Of course, Shawan coming off the heartbreaking double overtime loss to Shaw. They would actually be in a contest that found themselves down 21-0 heading into the second quarter before they actually started scoring late in the first half. But in typical Shawan fashion, very similar to against Shaw, they got down 27-0 against Shaw in the first half before they got going. Shawan actually ended up getting back on track, down 35-21. They actually would tie the ball game up at 35 in the fourth quarter, but the defense couldn't hold as McKendree scored what would turn out to be a game-winning touchdown with 4:41 to play in the fourth quarter. It was pretty much an efficient and clean day for both teams on offense. And total yards, Shawan 537, McKendree had 510. McKendree did have more passing yards than Shawan, but it was the running game this week for the Hawks, as they had 305 rushing yards to 160. And Bryce Witt, we normally speak about Bryce Witt and his passing acumen, his stats and the numbers. Of course, he had the 7 touchdown passes earlier in the season. Well, this week he does it on the ground, as he had 183 yards rushing and 2 touchdowns. And he became Shawan's first quarterback. Let me rephrase that. Let me get that cough out of there. Bryce Witt became Shawan's first quarterback to rush for 1,000 career yards. But the Hawks would drop to 1-3 now, 0-1 in the conference, and I believe nothing but conference play here on out for the Hawks. Have to give some love to the Livingstone Blue Bears, who moved to 4-0 with their first conference win over Lincoln, PA. The Blue Bears are one of 2 unbeaten teams in HBCU football. Of course, the other sits in their conference as well, Bowie State. And both defenses, actually it was a defensive ball game, even though the score was 35-19, I believe, for Livingstone. Really, both defenses held the opponent offensively to under 300 total yards. Livingstone had the ball for 36 minutes, and they were 5 for 5 in the red zone, which made all the difference in the world in that ball game. Again, Livingstone improves to 4-0, 1-0 in the conference. Lincoln drops to 0-4, and things get real for Livingstone next week as they get ready to take on Virginia Union. So we get to find out how real that 4-0 record is for the Blue Bears. Shaw hosting Edward Waters College, and they would beat up on the Tigers of Edward Waters 49-10. No nice homecoming or reunion for Greg Ruffin, former Shaw coach, this weekend, as Shaw would get 5 touchdown passes from quarterback Torrin Campbell. He was 16 of 23 for 222 yards. They'd also get 127 yards running from freshman Sidney Gibbs. In all, Shaw had 512 yards of total offense, and the defense for Shaw would get 6 sacks and 2 interceptions on Edward Waters. Shaw moves to 2-2, and Edward Waters now drops down to 0-4. And, of course, take note, Edward Waters is now in the 3rd game of a 4-game road trip. So one more road game before they can get back home, and I believe that home game will be against Allen University in, I believe what they're calling that, the AME Football Classic between Allen University and Edward Waters. The other game that took place in the AU Center was Albany State against Clark, and Albany State would run all over Clark 54-19. Clark actually got out to a first quarter lead and had a lead for the entire first quarter, 6-0, after returning a fumble for a touchdown, 47 yards. But then Albany State would go on a 47-0 run, scoring 30 points in the second quarter, 17 in the third quarter, and running for 393 yards as a team. 3 different running backs, count them, 3 different running backs had 90-plus yards for Albany State. They actually held Clark to 247 yards of total offense and just 27 rushing yards. Want to make mention of one more team, one more game, and that would be the Miles College Golden Bears. They won their home opener against Lane, and they did it in impressive fashion with a 54-22 lead, or 22 win over Lane. And it actually is the first time that Miles has started a season 3-1 since 2012 in a year. And that year they also went to the Division II playoffs, it should be noted. And I believe that team averaged something like 36 points a game. Well, this year's team is averaging 39 points a game. And Miles, of course, paying back Lane for a close loss. Should be noted. 3 wins by Miles this year, all against 3 teams that they lost close games to last year. I remember telling somebody how that payback tour was going to be, and Miles not disappointing. The score was actually, though, a 17-14 game at halftime before Miles would break out with a 28-0 run with 21 straight points in the third quarter, spearheaded by an 81-yard touchdown play between Daniel Smith and receiver Tyree Leonard. In all, Daniel Smith, the quarterback for Miles, he would throw 347 yards passing, 4 touchdowns, 0 interceptions. A pretty amazing game for him and the Golden Bears. 52 points. I believe I said the score was 52-22. I'm not sure if I said what that score was properly. I want to make sure I said that right. Of course, the final score being 52-28, excuse me. Got a couple other scores in my head. But the 52 points scored in the game were actually the most points scored for Miles since they scored 54 points back in 1983 against the University of Mobile. And the 590 total yards of offense, just the second most in Reginald Ruffin's era. He had a team actually have 602 rushing yards back in 2012. So that's going to wrap it up for my preview or review from Week 5. Maybe if I go down some other games, it should be noted in case you missed out, North Carolina A&T with a 37-0 win against Delaware State. That was back on a Thursday, and one of the top rushing performances, of course, was Jermaine Martin, who had 4 touchdowns in that ball game. We mentioned, of course, DeWanya Tucker with his 263 yards. And then, of course, you had 2 different passers throw 4 touchdowns in Daniel Smith and Akeel Glass. And then in terms of receivers, Xavier Moore from Alabama A&M with 218 was the top and Leonard, Tyree, and Miles with 176. But there are some guys who were over 200 in all-purpose yards, guys like Anthony Evelyn of Lane with 220 all-purpose yards. He had 102 in kickoff returns, 118 passing. And then there was also, how about Terraris Saffold with 279 all-purpose yards. He had 175 in kick returns. He returned 7 of them. And he also had some yardage from rushing and receiving. Jimmy Robinson had 202 all-purpose yards for Bethune. Tobias Taylor had 207 all-purpose yards for Virginia Union. So just want to mention some of those guys and some of those key superlatives. Of course, you can find any of the scores on our scoreboard. You can always find it on Instagram. If you go to @mybcsn1, you'll see it there. Of course, it's on our Facebook page as well. And I want to encourage you to always follow us on Twitter and Instagram @mybcsn1. And on Facebook, that's where you can find us as well, same username. And also, make sure you give us a shout. Let us know that you're out there watching or you're listening, and we greatly appreciate it. Share our show with a couple of different people, maybe. Let them know we're out there and what we're trying to do in this world and this medium for black college athletics, and especially black college football. But coming up after this break, you're going to hear a report from A.D. Drew. A.D., of course, was on the road at Howard University, at Bowie State, and, of course, he finished the night at Morgan State. So the A.D. Drew, we called it the BCSN Tour of the DMV, and that's where you can that's where you'll see this report and his recap of those games. But that's going to do it for me. I'm going to turn it over to my man A.D. Drew after the commercial, and I appreciate you listening to this wrap-up. And, of course, stay tuned. Coming up in October, the release of the BCSN Top 5 Division I schools and Top 5 Division II/NAIA schools coming up from the Black College Sports Network. Thanks for listening. I'm going to give it over to AD and get out of the way. Peace out.
Majesty is a premium health and wellness tea line focused on bringing delicious yet healthy tea blends to the community. Filled with an abundance of vitamins and antioxidants, we work to blend teas with exotic spices and fruits to produce scrumptious and wholesome beverages. So check us out at mymajesties.com. That's MyMajesties.com. My Majesties, an Urban Passport member.
In the beginning, there was nothing but darkness. Then with one beautiful bang, there was light. But with light came life. And with life came thought. And with thought came endless possibilities. Time and space are not infinite. And as such, the Creator has tasked me with the tremendous responsibility of destroying alternate universes. So I created a tournament where I allow beings from countless possibilities the chance to fight for their place in space and time. I am Alpha, and this is Versus.
Be on hand to witness the renewal of an ages-old HBCU gridiron rivalry. It's the inaugural AME Football Classic taking place on Saturday, October 12th at 3 o'clock p.m. in Jacksonville, Florida. Head coach Greg Ruffin and the Edward Waters College Tigers take on head coach Teddy Keaton and the Allen University Yellow Jackets. For a limited time only, take advantage of our early bird ticket special at $15. For more information, call 904-470-8276 or log on to ewctigerpride.com.
whatever you've been through, we have a warm welcome waiting for you at more than 325 hotels around the world. Book today at DoubleTree.com. DoubleTree by Hilton, where the little things mean everything.
The Black College Sports Network is proud to partner with ComputerRatings.com. That's CompuGHTER ratings.com for the upcoming college football season. ComputerRatings.com delivers rankings, game predictions, and statistics for hundreds of professional and collegiate teams. The key feature of ComputerRatings.com is the Versus Sports Simulator, which allows users to simulate any possible matchup and view the predicted scores along with a side-by-side stats analysis. Improve your odds by signing up for a subscription. Monthly, semi-yearly, and yearly subscriptions are available. For our listeners and viewers, use the promo code BCSN19 and get 15% off of your subscription at checkout. Visit www.computerratings.com. That's CompuGHTER ratings.com.
The BCSN 3 campuses, 3 cities, 1-day tour begins at Green Stadium in Washington, D.C. Watch this trickeration on the opening drive of the game. Touchdown, Wildcats. On the next drive, Akevius Williams goes with the read option and keeps it once again to put Bethune up 14-0. Kalen Newton left the program on Friday, but freshman Quentin Williams does his best Newton impression right here on this play. Dedrick Parsons also puts in some work to pick up the slack for the Bison, but Bethune proves to be too much, defeating Howard 37-29.
2 minutes remain in the first quarter here in Bowie, Maryland.
It's the Jerome Johnson Show in his first career start, passing for 307 yards and 4 touchdowns. Here's one of his 2 rushing touchdowns right here, though. But he did have an interception right here in the red zone. Watch Johnson go in untouched for his second rushing touchdown as number 23 Bowie routes St. Augustine 54-6.
Ladies, we're reporting live for the Black College Sports Network. We're here in Baltimore, Maryland. Yes, y'all.
North Carolina Central defense shuts down Morgan on a 4th and goal on the Bears' first possession of the game. Then watch this crazy play here as Eagles quarterback Davius Richards scrambles and then fumbles. Latrell Collier alertly picks up the ball and goes out of bounds at the 1 as they take it in on the next play. Here it is again in slow motion, you all. The PAT was no good. Central is up 6-3. Central is leading the FCS in interceptions, and on 2 consecutive drives, they pick off the Bears in the red zone. Richard holds on to the ball this time and takes it all the way, covering 62 yards to put Central up 13-3. Second half, the Bears defense steps up right here. Fumble 6 as the Bears cut the Eagles' lead to 13-10. A 6-yard touchdown by Richard, and then this 43-yard touchdown right here by Latrell Collier breaks the game wide open. DJ Gillette tries to keep Morgan close with this 18-yard touchdown to Messiah Bailey. But the Eagles defense proves to be too much. as they get their third interception of the day. Eagles hold on to defeat the Bears 27-17.
It's like a loop machine.